Trump, a sitting president, has never attended oral arguments before today, and he is the reason for today's arguments. Last year, the president signed an executive order limiting birthright citizenship, and now members of the Supreme Court appear to be skeptical of the constitutionality of that executive order that you see him signing. Let's bring in NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, and also with us NBC News legal analyst Dte4. Danny, before we get into the arguments today, let me start with you. Can you explain, before we get into like the exact how those arguments went, what is the crux of what's going on here? What is the administration pointing to say maybe we can have a reinterpretation of birthright citizenship?
As complicated as this case is, Kate, you can often distill it down to a single phrase, and that's exactly what's at issue here. And you could really distill it down to a single word: jurisdiction. There's a clause in the 14th Amendment that says essentially all people born here and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, meaning the United States, are citizens. For centuries now, we have understood that to mean that as long as you're born here, you are a citizen. However, the administration, there it is, you see the language right there, jurisdiction thereof. Interestingly enough, look at that last word: and of the state wherein they reside. One of the arguments the Trump administration is making is that that is textual evidence that subject to the jurisdiction thereof means someone who is domiciled here, because they say reside again. But here's the issue. I mean, look, the administration is an underdog here, but the language has to mean something. Subject to the jurisdiction thereof. If you took it out, then you just have birthright citizenship. So we're at least going to have to find out what that word jurisdiction means in the 14th Amendment.
And Kelly, you were outside of the Supreme Court earlier today. We mentioned the protests. We mentioned that President Trump showed up, a historic appearance. It's drawing a lot of attention. Can you talk about the history that was made?
It is striking because the president typically does not attend an oral argument, respecting that the court is part of a co-equal separate branch of government. And here, of course, the president is the reason for this, because he put into effect the executive order that's at the heart of this. It has been overturned by lower courts and thus getting to the Supreme Court. It is his vision of immigration that is really at play here. And when you talk about skepticism, even from judges, justices who are conservative, including some of those appointed by President Trump, that was evident today. And while we don't know which way they will rule yet, we've got a few months before we know what the outcome will be. When you hear questions and when you hear points of inquiry from the justices that sound skeptical, that gives us a sense of a window into their thinking. Now, for example, President Trump, after he attended just the government's remarks today, their presentation, he was not there when a lawyer for the ACLU was arguing on behalf of maintaining birthright citizenship as it is. He put out a post talking about the United States being a stupid country for having birthright citizenship and that other nations don't do that. Well, that's not true. Other nations do that. There are certainly European countries that don't give birthright citizenship, but it is not unique to the United States. Justice Kavanaugh, an appointee of President Trump, said, but we're not talking about the law of other countries. We're talking about American law and the U.S. Constitution. That's the kind of skepticism that we saw at different times throughout today's arguments.
Danny, we just have about 20 seconds. Would you agree that they seem to be leaning toward going against the Trump administration's view?
Absolutely, Kate. We're in March Madness season, so you could say the Trump administration is a 16 seed. They're an underdog. The justices seemed visibly skeptical. They asked such questions as, why are you citing Roman law and Abraham Lincoln's letters? So all odds.
Dte4, Kelly O'Donnell, thank you. Opening day.